So what we've been working on is over the last 6 to 7 months, our department, the Sheriff's Department, with special victims specifically, LAPD, the District Attorney's Office, DCFS, and countless other units within the county have worked together as a committee, which ICAN helped put together, to work on some protocols within the county that would help all of us in how we investigate child abuse cases. So this is a quick presentation I'm going to give you guys as to the PowerPoint that we put together specifically for law enforcement officers within LA County as to what we're trying to accomplish within these investigations. We go into the very basic, what's the mandates, and I'll explain why that's important because it's a constant reminder of what the mandate is regarding the reporting of child abuse. So we start with that. We also include that there's two different agencies that conduct investigations. It's law enforcement and Department of Children's Services. The reason that's very important is because law enforcement and Department of Children's Services have two very distinct investigations that they conduct based on what they're trying to accomplish. From the law enforcement's perspective, we have a criminal standpoint. Did a crime occur? And if so, we investigate it from that perspective. From DCFS, theirs is a family preservation. So it's important because when we're talking about the investigation of these cases, we're looking at multiple different interviews to accomplish different outcomes based on the information given to you. What we're doing is we're putting these children through multiple interviews, which causes more trauma to the children. And by working better as a team, if we conduct one interview with everybody at the table there, then we eliminate many of those interviews, and that's working out a lot better with a lot of the things that we're putting forward. That's why we talk about it. One of the other problems that we saw in the past was the sharing of information. We become very protective of our cases because we have a passion to protect these children, so we think it's our case and our case alone, and we're not going to share with anyone else because it's our case. And that's not just a law enforcement perspective, but it's in everybody's perspective who touches these cases. And I'll touch on that and how that affects the medical field also, because you're part of this process, you know, and sometimes from the very onset. It's a little bit more of what we talk about in the mandated of the cross-reporting. We have an electronic system you guys might or might not have heard of, the eSCAR system, what we have in LA County, but that is the system we currently use. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Our department has used it as a call for service. So what that means for us is when we get eSCAR or a notification through the electronic system that there's an allegation of child abuse, we handle it no different than if somebody picks up a phone and calls and says, I think my neighbor's doing something at this point. Based on what that information is on that report, we send a black and white vehicle out to that location to start the initial investigation of what that allegation is. Why that's important is because not every agency, law enforcement agency in the county does it that way. That's the way our department does it, but in some agencies, law enforcement agencies, they have an eSCAR police officer, so to speak, that works 40 hours a week. Right? What happens when they're not there? Well, then they have to triage what they think it might be, and then they either hold it till that Monday or whenever that person's day is back at work, or they send somebody out there who normally doesn't handle these cases. Well, I don't have to tell you where all the problems come in, right? So what we've done is when we present, we've already done 2 of these presentations to the South Bay Police Chiefs and to the San Gabriel Valley Police Chiefs. They've been very receptive of looking into it and just doing it as a call for service and getting away from having a person dedicated on a 40-hour a week to do these type of incidents. It's a very quick outline of how the system works. The citizen calls, goes to DCFS hotline, eSCARs is generated, then it goes to DCFS and to law enforcement. Very basic. Talks about the detention. I heard somebody earlier speak about that, the warrant and warrantless detentions of children when we go into a home. It's become a big issue. We're working through that because of all the legal issues that come into play. And it's still something that we're working with on the law enforcement side. It's not a tool we want to completely give away because there are going to be some emergencies where we want to have the ability of removing that child at that time based on whatever's in front of us that presents an emergency for their protection. This is kind of what we're handing out to the deputies and the patrol officers out in the field. Some of the things that are the most important to us are what's in blue. If there is an incident where they determine that no crime has occurred, but for whatever reason they think that the services of DCFS are still something that this family can benefit from, we're asking them to make an immediate notification to DCFS. Where in the past, a lot of the policies basically said as soon as possible. Well, to me, as a deputy sheriff in a black and white, as soon as possible means whenever I get around to it, to be quite honest. It could be the day after I finish the report, next day when I come back to work, and if I'm working early mornings, it could be 2 days from now. Okay, so we want that notification to be made immediately and obtain the reference number from DCFS so that DCFS can start their investigation. The other big important thing is we want to make sure that not only law enforcement, but DCFS is aware that we can share information without having to go through a warrant, so to speak, right? That's very important. We just had a case recently, which was a very huge case, and when we went to interview the suspect says, I'm not talking to the cops. But for whatever reason, chose to speak to the DCFS worker and tell the worker everything. Well, of course, we shared that information, and that information was very important in getting a criminal filing. That person today is looking at life in prison because of that information that was shared. And that's really the importance of the sharing of information. These are our goals. Not only do we want to start from the initial onset with the patrol deputy, but it continues with the investigators. The investigators at Special Victims are told as soon as they get a case, they are to reach out to DCFS, find out who the worker is, start that relationship to work as a team so that everything is done as a team from the point that it starts. How are you guys affected by all of this? We get notifications from hospitals when a child is brought into a hospital, to an emergency room, to an urgent care clinic, or what have you. This is a big county. If we take it to a county hospital, there's a history of the child's medical history. If they take it to a private hospital, there is none. And some of these parents, some of these caregivers have gotten very smart, and they jump around from one medical center to another. And then there's no sharing of information, so when we're trying to investigate this case, it's a huge task unless somehow we know that that child was at this center in the past. Because of all the medical records and the confidentiality, it becomes very difficult, right? The other side of it is that the notification from your standpoint, the medical field, to us, a lot of hospitals handle it differently. They all have different protocols, different rules, because they're all county hospitals one thing, private hospitals, depending on what their attorneys tell them, quite honestly, they have a different set of protocols. A lot of people think that where the mandated part becomes important is if you call DCFS, you've met the mandate. Technically, yes. But remember, if the incident occurred from somebody outside of the home who caused this injury, DCFS is not involved, right? It's only law enforcement. So although you notify DCFS and eventually law enforcement will get the notification, it delays the process. And in some cases, we lose a lot of the evidence. The other side that we see, and we had this occur recently last week, is a child's taken into an urgent care center, and the medical staff was trying to be very, very helpful. So I'll give you an example. So the child fell from a couch, was the story, right? The follow-up question was, so that must have been a high couch, right? And that must have been a hardwood floor or a hard surface floor. So when we get there, what did the parents say? Well, our couch is very high, and we have tile on the floor. Oh, and by the way, yeah, there was a toy that was between the couch and the floor, and the child also hit his head on the toy before it hit the ground. None of that was true. But because there was a delay in also getting us there, by the time we got home, the area rug that was in front of the couch was now in another room. Okay, but they forgot to dust and clean the floor so we could see the area that was not the same shade of color. So we knew there was something there. That mom, by the way, currently is facing life in prison from the charges that were filed. So those are the things that we just have to be aware of, the sharing of information and the protocols, and keep in mind that it's very important to, when the mandated reporting comes in, not only to notify us, law enforcement, but there's nothing that says you can't notify both DCFS and law enforcement. It would really help in the protocols. And I know you're trying to help with the kids and sometimes in the protection and all the legal laws, but let us know, because if there's a process, because we can also do some things if we need to legally to get that information from your hospital legally without putting anybody in the medical field at any risk. Thank you. Oh, one more thing when it comes to private hospitals, it really becomes everything I talked about a little bit more difficult, because the private hospitals aren't really mandated to give us any information under the law, and there's absolutely no history. And depending on which private hospital we go to, the protocols of how they handle the child that's coming in and what they're required to do or obligated to do differ from one hospital to the other. And it becomes quite difficult sometimes to try and maneuver through all those set of rules to obtain the information that we need or to get the treatment that we need from these kids. And so as part of being this team building that we're doing with law enforcement and DCFS, eventually what I'd like to do is get into a team building with the medical field also, so we're all on the same page when it comes to the investigation of child abuse.